From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel announced that the Caribbean country is preparing to enter the first stage of recovery following the coronavirus outbreak. The Cuban president noted that the strategy to confront this period of the pandemic has been prepared, consisting of two stages. The first is the post-COVID-19 recovery, which implies returning to the greatest possible normality while maintaining measures that have proven effective in preventing the spread of the virus. The president explained that over the next few days, each and every measure and action will be readied for implementation at the appropriate time. And Cuban Prime Minister Manuel Marrero Cruz announced measures to resume activities in the healthcare system.
In the first phase, all hospital services will resume at 50% of capacity. In the second phase, 75% of hospital services will be reestablished. And in the third phase, hospitals will offer all services as normal. The same will occur with the stomatology-related services, which will also begin at 50%, then 75% until the complete re-establishment of services.
And the Cuban Prime Minister also announced new measures in the tourism sector as part of the post-COVID-19 stage.
We are preparing to start receiving international tourism. First, at the border, a specific protocol will be applied when the first tourists arrive. A PCR test will be applied and travelers' temperatures will also be taken, among other protocols. International tourism will begin in the second phase, but with one peculiarity, that is, we will only begin to receive the first international tourists in the north and south keys of the country. Specifically, the first destinations would be the keys of Santa Maria, Cayo Coco, Cayo Guillermo, Cayo Cruz, and Cayo Largo del Sur. These would be the only destinations in that second phase, which is when international tourism enters.
Brazil's health crisis continues to worsen with rising complaints about the government's mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. The South American country has reported over 1,200 coronavirus deaths in the last 24 hours, most of them in Rio de Janeiro. Citizens have consistently condemned the administration's failure to provide resources to tackle the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, the government continues to ease restrictions despite intensive care units at public hospitals being at 88% capacity. Experts have warned that the COVID-19 epidemic in Brazil has not peaked yet. And activists from the non-governmental organization Rio de Paz have dug 100 symbolic graves at Copacabana Beach to mark the high number of COVID-19 deaths in the country and to protest against the government's response to the pandemic. Latin American and Caribbean leaders called for collaboration on matters of public health and the economy during a virtual conference of the ALBA Group. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel highlighted the importance of sharing experiences and creating common measures to stop the spread of COVID-19 in the region. Meanwhile, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who convened the event, proposed the establishment of a joint council of ministers of foreign affairs and the economy to draw up plans to mitigate the financial impact of the coronavirus crisis. President Maduro also emphasized the need for collaboration to create COVID-19 vaccines and treatment plans. And Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, speaking during the ALBA video conference, highlighted the importance of economic initiatives such as Petrocaribe, the ALBA Bank and the Sucre currency to address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We have seen the creation of Petrocaribe, and we have promised and are committed to reviving Petrocaribe this year. We have already discussed how the steps and methods to do so. We are doing everything in order to create the ALBA Bank to collaborate with the revival of our post-pandemic economies. We took a wonderful step, which must be resumed with the creation of the Sucre for currency exchange and trade promotion. Currency exchange that is based on the local currency of each country, but it is also a great way of promoting trade.
Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega recalled the cornerstone of the foundation of ALBA TCP and noted the importance of exchanges in the field of commerce among underdeveloped countries.
An exchange in the field of commerce in all of those aspects that are essential to move forward in these moments where the economic repercussions are badly shaking many countries, many nations. It is harder in the most impoverished countries. It is harder in the countries with less resources.
Colombian senators have condemned the assistance provided to paramilitaries and irregular groups by U.S. forces. During a Senate debate on Wednesday, Congressman for the Alternative Democratic Pole Party, Ivan Cepeda, warned that the U.S. military's operations manual allows for its troops to associate with illegal groups. Likewise, Democratic Pole Senator Wilson Arias tweeted pictures of the manual, which show that part of the mission of U.S. troops sent to Colombia early this month is to strengthen and assist paramilitaries. Argentina has sent 3 bills to Congress to strengthen its claim of sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands, which the United Kingdom disputes as one of its overseas territories. One of the bills is a draft law on the demarcation of the outer limit of the Argentinian continental shelf, according to the conclusions of a 2016 study by the UN Commission.
Argentina has the right over the seabed, the subsoil, obviously over the upper water column. A good part of that new platform is usurped, as you know, by the United Kingdom, and that is the conflicting issue that also motivates us to make of this a law.
And in Argentina, the mothers of Plaza de Mayo this Thursday marked 2,200 Thursdays of uninterrupted marches. At 3:30 p.m. local time this Thursday, they held a special broadcast to explain what the plaza means to their struggle and how much it is missed during the lockdown.
They say that 43 years ago, their lives ceased as Argentina's military dictatorship between the years 1976 and 1983 oversaw the systematic murder and disappearance of tens of thousands. On a day in April of 1977, 14 courageous women, unable to stay quiet, left their homes to confront the dictatorship which had stolen their children. It was the construction of a new political space at the Plaza de Mayo of Buenos Aires. Now in their 80s and early 90s, they are still marching. Those mothers of the association say that the central day of the week is Thursday, and that the plaza has been their center of struggle, and it's within that plaza that the socialization of maternity was born. From that first day they stepped foot in the plaza, they thought that if they gave it their all, defying persecution and possible arrest or abduction, perhaps they could bring back their sons and daughters. They commemorated 43 years of struggle this year, this time virtually, in compliance with the coronavirus prevention measures in place. Among the accomplishments of the mothers has been the identification and recovery of the remains of some of the victims. They have been a reference in the search for truth and justice, not only for Argentina, but for the continent.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so stay right where you are. Welcome back to From the South. Vietnam has now gone 8 weeks without reporting any new COVID-19 cases of local transmission. As confirmed by the National Commission in charge of containing the epidemic, in the past 56 days, the country has reported 192 coronavirus cases, all of which have been nationals who returned to the country from harder-hit nations. 12 cases remain active. Vietnam is one of the few countries in the world that has recorded no COVID-19 fatalities, while the total number of cases reported is just 332. The most serious case reported is a 43-year-old British citizen who was hired as a pilot for Vietnam Airlines and who continues to recover from the disease. The return of traffic to the streets, the reopening of businesses and restaurants, and the return of thousands of people to work have been some of the signs in recent weeks that things are returning to normal in China's urban areas. Nevertheless, prevention continues to be a priority of citizens and authorities.
More than 4 months after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and despite that in Beijing the risk of contagion remains low, prevention measures remain in place. We see them in the majority of public spaces, where there are measures such as the points of taking temperature and the use of disinfectant and social distancing.
I prefer to continue taking care. I know that the situation is very controlled, but at least for a while we have to take precautions, because there could be outbursts and I don't want to catch it.
The requirement to use a mask has begun to be relaxed, mostly in open-air spaces. Citizens are being cautious, and nearly everyone continues to use them when they go out to the streets.
The mask continues being necessary. Chinese people are used to it for a long time now. It protects us.
Restaurants have also taken special measures and have kept tables separated. Drivers from some taxi services must upload videos to their internal platforms to demonstrate that they have disinfected their vehicles and are using gloves and masks.
With the arrival of summer, many people are already going to restaurants, but I'm only going to work. I prefer that.
The world requires rules and regulations for workplaces and social spaces following the coronavirus, and China, a country at the vanguard in the fight against COVID-19, looks to be the testing laboratory for what comes after the pandemic.
China has accused the United States of provocative acts after a US military aircraft flew over Taiwan on Tuesday. The aircraft took off from a large US military base on Japan's Okinawa Island and flew over northern and western Taiwan on its way to Southeast Asia. China's Taiwan Affairs Office said it was an illegal act and a seriously provocative incident. It added that the aircraft harmed China's sovereignty, security and development rights and contravened international law. Washington has also increased its Navy deployments through the narrow strait that separates Taiwan from China. And floods and mudslides in South China have uprooted hundreds of thousands of people from their homes and left dozens dead or missing. The natural disaster caused by torrential downpours led to the relocation of 230,000 people and the destruction of more than 1,300 homes. In 3 southern regions, at least 27 people have been killed or are missing. The Emergency Management Ministry has reported direct economic losses of more than 550 million due to the flooding. The United States reported almost 14,000 new coronavirus cases this Thursday, with the total now surpassing 2 million. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 death toll continues to rise, now standing at over 115,000. The total number of cases in the country represents almost 30% of those reported worldwide, followed by Brazil and Russia. In New York City alone, nearly 22,000 people have died, followed by neighbouring New Jersey, with over 165,000 confirmed cases and more than 12,000 fatalities. The state of California is also one of the worst hit, with nearly 140,000 cases and a death toll of almost 5,000. The European Union is expected to begin the gradual reopening of its borders to non-EU travellers from July.
Today has adopted a recommendation where we recommend the 2 main actions that should be taken by Schengen member states and Schengen associated countries. First is on internal borders. We recommend and call on these member states and Schengen associated countries to lift all internal border restrictions that have been in place according to the COVID-19 situation.
In France, more than 500,000 jobs have been lost in the first quarter of 2020 due to the coronavirus crisis. According to a report by the National Institute of Statistics and Economic Studies, the job losses are due to the collapse of 40% of the temporary workforce as a result of lockdown measures imposed on March 17th. A similar plunge occurred during the economic crisis in the 2000s, which saw a 13.9% fall in demand for temporary agency employment in the fourth quarter of 2008 and a 13% fall in the first quarter of 2009. The Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, warned all countries to remain vigilant as the threat of COVID-19 resurgence remains high.
And we must also remember that although the situation is improving here in Europe, globally it's getting worse. We still have a long road ahead, and we will continue to need global solidarity to defeat this pandemic fully.
And we're taking one last and very short break now, so stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. The number of coronavirus cases in Africa has surpassed 200,000, with more than 5,000 COVID-19 fatalities recorded across the continent. 10 out of 54 countries are currently driving the rising numbers, accounting for nearly 80% of all the cases. More than 70% of the deaths have occurred in just 5 countries: Algeria, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa and Sudan. South Africa is the most affected, accounting for 25% of the continent's total cases, with higher numbers of cases and deaths daily. Over 90,000 people across the continent have recovered from the virus so far. Ethiopia's parliament has approved an extra year in office for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed after August elections were postponed due to the coronavirus pandemic. The upper house voted on a resolution on Wednesday that extends the terms of federal and regional lawmakers, as well as the executive branch of the government, for between 9 and 12 months. The parliament speaker said the elections will only take place after health officials determine that the novel coronavirus is no longer a threat. And people in Malawi will head to the polls on June 23rd, a week earlier than initially ordered by the courts after last year's elections results were overturned. On February 3rd, the Constitutional Court annulled the vote that returned Peter Mutharika to power, citing widespread, systematic and grave irregularities. The court went on to rule that fresh presidential elections be held within 150 days. The elections were initially scheduled for July 2nd, but opposition members of parliament passed a resolution setting the polls for June 23rd. In Zimbabwe, senior military officials have denied the possibility of a coup led by former Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front members who are currently in exile. The group was loyal to the late former President Robert Mugabe. However, a statement by the National Security Council, which includes heads of the country's security wings, said the rumours of a coup are part of an agenda by merchants of discord and purveyors of falsehoods to cause alarm. It added that the country boasts a strong electoral culture and has no room for parliamentary coups. The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa and the South African Cabin Crew Association have once again slammed the government's plans to liquidate state-owned airline SA Express. The two labour movements say the move will result in thousands of jobs being lost. They have since urged the government to explore alternatives to save the airline from collapsing. In April, SA Express was placed into provisional liquidation after it completely ran out of funds and was unable to pay its creditors. The death toll from a ship packed with sub-Saharan African migrants that sank off the Tunisian coast this week has risen to 46. The first 20 bodies were found on Tuesday, with more recovered on Thursday. 53 people had set out on the vessel towards Italy over the weekend. Tunisian officials say an investigation has been launched into the incident. Meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency says attempts to reach the Italian coast from Tunisia were significantly higher in the first 4 months of 2020 than in the same period last year. The Organisation of Islamic Cooperation has once again denounced the Israeli government's plan to annex Palestinian territory. Following a virtual summit, members of the organisation issued a joint statement in which they rejected Israel's move to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. The group went on to state that Tel Aviv would be responsible for any consequences that may arise, as it warned that member states would take political and legal measures to address the threats posed by Israel.
Any attempt to change the character and status of the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territory is void, has no legal consequence, and will therefore be confronted at all levels. This requires the formation of an international front to vigorously challenge the aggressive Israeli plans. We must take all possible political, legal, diplomatic, and economic measures to confront and isolate the Israeli colonial system.
Iraq and the United States are set to begin strategic talks aimed at re-establishing ties after months of tensions. Due to coronavirus travel restrictions, the first high-level talks in more than a decade will be held online. Discussions will centre on the fate of the US-led military coalition, as well as economic and cultural ties. Tensions skyrocketed in January following a US strike on Baghdad that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and Iraqi commander Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. This prompted Iraqi lawmakers to vote in favour of ousting all foreign troops, while Washington threatened crippling sanctions. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can get these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.